Welcome to the DNA of Things, where we continue to explore the fascinating intersection of science, technology, and human potential. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. Erik Korem, the founder and CEO of AIM7. Now, Dr. Korem is a high-performance pioneer with a rich background in sports science, having introduced athlete tracking technologies to collegiate and professional football teams. His extensive work includes collaborations with the NFL, the Power 5 NCAA programs, gold medal Olympians, Nike, and the U.S. Department of Defense. He holds a doctorate in exercise science from the University of Kentucky and is a renowned expert in sleep and stress resilience. In our conversation, we delve into Dr. Korem's inspiring journey from an overweight, bullied child to a visionary leader in sports science. We discuss his revolutionary work with elite athletes, including his innovative approaches at Florida State, where his methods led to an 88% reduction in injuries and a championship win. Dr. Korem shares his insights on his transition from athlete to high-performance coach and how these experiences shaped his venture at AIM7. Today, you'll learn about the groundbreaking applications of sports science principles to everyday fitness, particularly through AIM7's focus on personalized wellness solutions for diverse populations, from pickleball enthusiasts to busy parents. Dr. Korem explains the importance of adaptive capacity and how the AIM7 technology leverages big data to provide tailored recommendations for improved health and performance. This episode promises to be a deep dive into the future of health and wellness, providing valuable takeaways for everyone interested in optimizing their potential. Let's dive in. All right, Erik. Well, hey, welcome to the DNA of Things.
Thank you for having me here, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you, especially, busy founder, CEO, really keen to dive into the stuff that you've got going on at AIM7. Incredible background that you bring in terms of science, exercise science, sports science, the athlete management side of things, essentially, big data and how do we use data to close the gap of realizing human potential, human capability. So lots of stuff that we can certainly dive into. But, before we do, I'm always just so interested to hear about, the hero's journey. So thinking on how you have become, this visionary CEO, founder CEO at what seems to be an emergent, force in how we understand, human performance, human recovery. How do we optimize our human capability? So really keen to hear the personal journey. So how does Erik, the boy, come to this founder CEO leading the charge on health and human performance? What are some of the pivotal moments in your career that got you to where you are?
Well, first of all, I feel like I'm just starting over every single day. I was talking to a friend recently who's a founder, and he's like, every day is as far as I've ever been on this journey. I'm not a second time founder, right? So I'm just trying to do the best I can. But for me, this journey really started as a kid. I was overweight. I was bullied a lot, and I never felt like people saw me for me. And they always just saw this kind of external shell. And I was overweight for a long period of time and into my teen years. And so from first grade on, it was just school. I loved going to school, but I hated going to school. And so I always wanted to kind of prove people wrong. And fortunately, I was a pretty decent athlete and started with baseball. My parents wouldn't let me play football until I was in sixth grade, which here in the States is I was 12 years old. And that was the first time I was ever able to physically exert my will on somebody. And I found that to be a lot of fun, especially the kids that were giving me a hard time. And it was kind of one of those things shut your mouth. I'm going to do it on the field type of thing. I really just fell in love with this idea that I could go out and perform. And so in my teen years, I would mow lawns and like pay for clinics on how to get faster. This is like the 90s. So there wasn't a whole lot out there. There was books you could buy at Barnes and Noble, but one of the first books I ever read was by Dr. Bob Ward, called Sports Speed. He was like the first real true like kind of science-based performance coach in the NFL at the Dallas Cowboys. He invented the Wonderlic test for that at that time. It was pretty cutting edge. And I actually wanted to be a surgeon. And when I went to college, I was a walk-on football player at Texas A&M, and there was a physiology lab attached to our weight room. And I would just see all this, like Gatorade was doing some really interesting early studies with RTDs. And, I saw these people with these masks on, like in there lifting weights while we're training. I went to our strength coach. I'm like, what is this? And he's like, there's a science to training athletes. And I just really got bit by the bug. And, fortunate enough, I was able to earn an opportunity to play while I was there, and went on to grad school at the University of Arkansas. And that's really when the world opened up to me. One day this coach walks in and he's like, hey, would you like to train these track athletes? And one of them was Veronica Campbell Brown, who ended up being an 8-time Olympic medalist, 3-time Olympic gold medalist. She's a Jamaican sprinter.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to travel the world with her and her husband, Omar, who was also a world-class sprinter, and started learning how the rest of the world was training athletes. And that's where I met Dan Paf, was in Istanbul, Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And I got this idea, like I was still interested in potentially being a surgeon, but I was like, you know what? I want to bring this sophisticated way of training athletes to the US. And so I became a strength and conditioning coach. And then fast forward a number of years, in 2011, I was at Florida State. And I was doing everything from speed development, because my work in track, to nutrition. And after that first season, the head coach was like, look, I want you to be the director of operations, basically like the general manager, because I was really good at organizing things and strategy. And I was like, look, I'll do it if you name me director of sports science and operations. He's like, yeah, call yourself whatever you want. That job didn't exist in the States yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Australia for a month. I got invited over there by an Aussie rules football team, the GWS Giants, which was a startup franchise. And we did an information exchange with them. And John Quinn, who is the high performance director, really showed me what high performance looked like. And then I kind of dug into sports science and how it was being used. And I came back with a suitcase of like athlete wearables.
Mm-hmm.
So we were the first ones to start putting these tracking devices on players. And the UI with the devices were so bad. So it was like raw telemetry data. So I ended up hiring a former NASA propulsion engineer, because they just cut the space program. So he would sit in a closet and I'd be like, this is how I want to see the data. And we basically created a model for the game of football.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to use that to reverse engineer like how we should be training the players, and then showing our coaches like, hey, we're killing our guys during the week of, we're playing like 5 games before we get to Saturday. And we had a loaded roster, but our guys were just exhausted and we were underperforming. And we made a bunch of changes in the way that we were training and the way that we were structuring practice. And the next year we had an 88% reduction in injury, and our team ended up winning a championship. And then the NFL flew like 8 people in and like, what is going on here? They'd heard about what we're doing. And it led to a mass proliferation of these wearable devices. And so now like every NFL game is tracked with this. And so that was kind of the genesis of this for me. And my career kind of went in the direction of high performance. And that's when I did my doctoral work at the University of Kentucky on sleep and stress resilience. But that was the genesis of it. It was kind of like this personal thing I had, and then just insatiable curiosity and just being opportunistic. I guess I saw my opportunity and I went and kind of took it.
It's interesting. You come to this breakout moment, I guess grade 12, you say, is when you started playing football, or sorry, grade 6 when you started playing football.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're 12 years old, and then you're like, okay, I'm an athlete. And it's like, and then you're a walk-on at Texas A&M, which is crazy. So how does that even happen?
Yeah, I mean, I could have played football at like some smaller, like 1AA schools or whatever, but A&M had just won the conference title, and a coach called me and was like, hey, you want to be an invite walk-on? And there's a whole lot of story behind that. But basically, I ended up showing up and getting my brains beat out for a couple of
Sure.
years because
Sure.
we had just at that time, some elite players on the roster. But it taught me a lot about resilience and how to
Mhm.
work hard and not be rewarded. I'll never forget. Actually, we had it was a spring football. Now, look, I'm not disillusioned about my size. I was like almost 6'3", 270 pounds, but I wasn't like elite. There were guys at the positions in front of me that played in the NFL. But we
Mhm.
had like a spring football game where it's like good on good, and the starting
Mhm.
guard goes down and like, Eric, you're gonna play. And the
Mhm.
guy I went up against was the 9th overall pick in the draft.
Wow.
And I graded out like a winning like 80 something percent. And I'll never
Mhm.
forget, the coach comes to me, we sit down, they go over the game grade, and he's like, Eric, can't believe it. You did a fantastic job, but you're not going to play next year.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I just went up against the best player on the team, one of the best players in college football, but you're already telling me that I'll never see the field. And for
Mhm.
some reason, I just kept going.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until we had a coaching change that I got my chance. But
Yeah.
it taught me this just like extreme level of just stick to itness.
Right. Well, isn't that so? That was the thing. That was the thing that came up for me in the conversation. Is like, okay, I love being an athlete, but now I'm going to train athletes. So there is this
Yeah.
like leap from, you know, like how does something like that happen?
Yeah, I don't know, you fall in love with it so much and you're always thinking about how much potential could be unlocked.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I never really accepted convention.
Mhm.
And that was something good and something that kind of worked against me a little bit because I was always pushing everybody around me to be better and to work harder.
Mhm.
And I remember at one institution I was at early on, I just had a lust for information. And I would
Mhm.
just, when I wasn't training athletes, I was in my office reading and calling people. And at one point, one guy's like, "Man, like you're always in your office learning. Like
Mhm.
you should be hanging out." And I was
Mhm.
like, "I'm not in this to hang out. I'm in this to be the best and to help our
Mhm.
athletes be the best." And some of that's good and some of that's bad. I probably should have been more of like a team player, but at the same time, like in that profession, there's a lot of laziness and people get jobs just because they know people. It's not like, a software engineer that can't code eventually gets found out pretty quick by their teammates.
Mhm.
You can have really amazing athletes and you can suck at your job and they're just going to be who they are. It's a very weird profession.
Yeah.
And so it's a network profession, not always a merit profession.
Interesting. Well, and the work that you did with sprinters, I want to dive into that a little bit to share some of my my own anecdotal experience where you probably met Andy O'Brien. He's pretty influential in the NHL space. He's done work with, I guess his first breakout athlete was Sidney Crosby, but he was like head strength and conditioning coach for Pittsburgh for a while. And I know now he does a lot of contracting in the league, but mostly, on ice stuff. But you remind me of him in a way where he talked about the labs, right? Like, wow, what are they doing? And like, I remember Andy, we were talking about the Rocky movie, which was like I gravitated to like like Rocky, like kind of like the rough like training and just the doing aspect of it. But he's like, oh no, like I like the Russian, right? Rocky IV, right? Drago, where he's like, yeah,
Yeah.
they have like all these like special training techniques and science. And anyway, he's like super, into that, quantified self aspect of it, if you will. And but also got the the sprinting component, like the application of speed power in a sport
Mm.
like hockey, and obviously applies in the NFL also. And I was quite fortunate with the sprinting background myself. I was a sprinter in college. I had an amazing coach who, I was a walk-on athlete myself. I was ranked 700th in the 60 meters. It's an indoor event, and 3 months with this coach that I'm ranked 7th in the country. So it's like
Wow.
what just happened there, right? And there's a lot of like unlocking that you can do on an athlete, because a lot of athletes are fighting themselves right now. Once you
Mhm.
get to a certain level, an Olympic level, I don't think you're going to get that profound of an impact. But one of the things that I learned, again, speed power, but athletics in general, it's like, how do you protect the environment, build the ecosystem for the athlete to kind of grow into and realize their potential? And so through my friend Andy, I started working with a lot of these NHL players, and because they're subject mostly to a team sport, team training type of philosophy, they're not necessarily getting the individual precision training that a track athlete gets, where it's like, if the coach here is like a foot strike on the track is just slightly off, it's like, whoa, slow down, back up, right? Because if an athlete like Usain Bolt is feeling, so if an athlete like Sidney Crosby is feeling 75% on game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, he can still score the game-winning goal with the support of his teammates. If Usain Bolt is 75%,
Right.
he's not making a high school final, right? So there's more room for error in individual sport versus team sport. But it was like, how do you bring aspects of the team sport, the individual sport to the team sport? And you know who I saw do this really well? This was probably about a decade ago now. Is Chris Roof and the folks at Baylor. So it sounds to me like some of the early work, pioneering work that you've been doing is been replicated. And I mean, that's kind of what I'm interested in hearing about is, you developed this model, for lack of a better word, based on your learnings in the NFL. And it seems to me that it's evolving based on some of the entrepreneurial work that you're doing now, and such that it seems that human performance in a group setting, is scalable at a population level, might be scalable. And to me, like that's unheard. Like what I think I'm hearing is like, are you scaling Mr. Miyagi? So tell me about like how you go from these models to this like big data ecosystem play that you're on.
Yeah. First of all, Chris and the Baylor staff did a great job. As a matter of fact, I was just texting with Andrew Altoff, I think it was yesterday. Altoff is the director of performance at the Carolina Panthers now, but they had a great team there. I just want to kind of go backwards just a second. One of the hard parts about individualized performance in a team setting is that the performance coach is not the ultimate decision maker. And one of the mistakes that I made was just seeing it from the smaller circle within the bigger circle. So the head coach is really the most powerful person in the organization. If you really, really want to change things, it should be the head coach that understands all of this. Or the head coach like in Australia, the high performance coach and the head sport coach usually work right next to each other. And here in the States, it's not even close to that yet. The best relationships that I see right now is where the director of performance and the head sport coach are just like lockstep. And they're seeing things through the same set of eyes. And you can make some of those small adjustments for the individual. And then the culture has to be set so that when changes are made for the individual, the rest of the team doesn't scoff. And that's kind of hard, to be honest. I mean, one time when I was at one school, this guy, I gave him a day off. Everything was just off. And I was like, man, you just need the day off. And I got so much flack from that. And there was actually somebody in the building there that used that against me, saying that I was soft because I gave how many times have I seen a head coach give a player off because I got so much academic workload, but because I gave him one day off in the weight room out of 365 days, that somehow that was being soft. And so you have to be situationally aware. And then there's also the individuals. I've noticed that sometimes the individual themselves does not want to change. Great example of this is when I was at one school, I would have players that, they would kind of push back on the personalized side of things until it came time for them to train for the NFL Combine. And then they would come in and be like, Coach, give me everything. And then they would see these stupid results, like just insane. And some of these, and you would just, it's like a sponge that had so much water yet to be squeezed out. And so part of it's like the maturity of the athlete that you're dealing with. It's the environment. And so I think this is going to be a problem in American sport for quite a long time. And the teams that can figure out the balance between all of these different components and how this shows up, they're going to have a significant advantage. And so it's a very Dr. Gershon Tenenbaum was a mentor of mine. He said, Eric, every situation is complex, multidimensional, and relative.
Mm.
And I always go back to that. Like you just can't make the same decision every single time. And people see the problem with like a lot of these wearable devices and the
Mhm.
data. Now we kind of go to this N of one thing is they see things every day as kind of is a brand new day, and they don't see things from a temporal perspective.
Mhm.
And that biological systems exist with a past and a future, right?
Mhm.
And so where we're trying to go with all this data from a business perspective, because I found it's a lot easier in the consumer population
Mhm.
because it is an N of one. It's a
Mhm.
consumer purchasing something or a system for themselves because they want to feel better.
Mhm.
And as long as you can tailor the intervention to the consumer's likes and dislikes, there's good behavior design involved, and you can link the decisions they have to make to the deepest levels of who they are and what they value, you can create some really cool
Mhm.
solutions. But sport, in a team sport or military group, it's just, and it even depends on, tier one guys, they have a level of autonomy, and then they do things as a unit, right? So it's their job to get themselves ready. So a lot of guys do a lot of things for themselves to get themselves ready, and they're dialed into some things. Other things like, you know what? I'm not going to do that because I feel if I do this CrossFit workout, it's going to give me the best mental state that I'm tough enough to go eat this, charge and then take the door, whatever. So it's like it's a complex problem. I think the consumer space, it's actually going to be easier than it is in a team sport environment.
Interesting. Okay. So we're kind of jumping into AIM7. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So
Oh,
what is AIM7?
yeah.
And is this one of the key innovations that we're talking about in terms of that? But it's we've got this groundbreaking insights from sports science and performance, and now you're talking about applying these to the consumer population. So
Mhm.
yeah, tell us about AIM7, and is this one of these such innovations to unlock human capability?
Yeah, I think, you know, from the big high level, we need to get people doing a couple basic things: moving enough,
Mm,
sleeping enough. I don't like the word stress management. I think that's a
mm,
fallacy. And then, eating nutritious foods, doing the basics. Why? Because the big picture of what we're trying to do is build more capacity for stress, or what we call adaptive capacity.
mhm,
And the way you do that is you deliberately engage with stress, and then you deliberately engage in rest. And the
mhm,
human body should adapt over time, right?
mhm.
The key is the right dose of stress with the right dose of rest.
Right,
And the levers of stress that you can pull, you want that to be tailored to the individual and what their capacity is in the moment, or their
right,
quote readiness, right?
right,
So
right.
yes, what AIM7 is doing is we're taking in wearable data, we're taking in psychometric data, we're taking in behavioral data of what people like to do, and then we're saying, hey, in these specific areas of mind, body, and recovery, this is what you should be doing today
Mhm,
in order to build more capacity, adaptive capacity, which will help you be more resilient. And we're finding some amazing things. We've had over 1,500 people use the product. And in the first 90 days, we're seeing like a 20% reduction in perceived stress, double digit improvements in sleep and mood and energy and all these different things because we're able to regulate, and we're giving them the mechanisms on how to regulate those things. We're not running experiments on people. I don't think that's not going to work. I think you have to give people very specific recommendations.
mhm.
And so that's what AIM7 is. And we're doing
What,
this in a
what
very,
does it mean? What does the name mean? What's in the
yeah.
name AIM7?
Yeah. So I wanted it to be AIM,
Mhm,
and I couldn't get AIM.com because that's AOL Instant Messenger. But the idea was we want to be pointing people in the right direction. And
mhm.
then 7 came along because it's like a number of perfection. It's like 7 days a week. It's whole,
Got
it's
it.
complete. So we're
Yep.
pointing you in the right direction. We're with you all the time. Our beachhead market, though, is pickleball.
Hmm.
And you're like, why pickleball, right? Like it's really hard to break into a crowded, noisy space. So as an entrepreneur, you want to look for a blue ocean. You don't want to go just fight off all the other sharks.
Yeah.
And we're the first health and fitness tech product in this entire market. In the States alone, 45 million people played the game last year. And then if you look at who's playing, it's such a diverse game.
Mm-hmm.
It spans 18 to 60 plus. It's wild who's playing. We're solving an immediate pain point for these people, which is injuries. But then
Mm-hmm.
all the other recommendation systems are layered in there. I was actually talking to a VP of one of the largest paddle companies in the world today. And she's like, "Hey, I've been using your product." And I was interested, to see what she was using it for. She goes, "I've been using it to sleep better."
Mm-hmm.
Like, interesting. She went that deep into the product that fast. She found what she was looking for. But yeah, so we're using this as a beachhead market for model building, that we can build even more robust and predictive models. So we've been able to do some pretty cool things on predicting people's mood and energy states, and then being able to provide recommendations. So that's where we're headed. And then we'll be able to license these models to other folks, because our mission is to empower people to live healthy and impactful lives. AIM7 doesn't always have to live out in front. Does that make sense? Like, we can
Yeah.
sit back in and work with others, because
Yeah.
our mission is to eventually help over 100 million people. And it's not going to be done through one singular product.
Sure. Sure. Well, it's interesting. I hear you talk about your product, and I'm sure listeners are thinking about, all kinds of other potential markets. And I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is because I do work with high performing entrepreneurs. Their big thing is like, how do I keep my cognition, my cognitive performance up? And, that has a lot to do with, perceived energy, actual energy levels, coming back to sleep, et cetera. And, I developed a really simple heuristic that I've found starts the conversation, at our kind of, call it our weekly, I call it the corner man sessions, right? Where, you're an entrepreneur, you go out there and you battle for the week, and it's just healthy to, sit down with somebody who's, been in the arena, so to speak, and just kind of unpack like what went well, what can we learn from. And, the entrepreneurial pursuit is often a lonely journey. So, I found that job, like the coaching entrepreneur, is very, very rewarding. But one of the things that I kept coming back to, and this is, learning from the, call it the athlete management system we built with Athletigen in previous days, which was basically your DNA plus the Hooper McKinnon survey, so to speak. And what I kept coming back to is like, when I use these 3 data points or 3 questions, which is that I've adapted for entrepreneurs, is like, how much time did you spend in quadrant 2? So that is like the non-urgent but critical things, like flossing your teeth, like planning your day, like journaling, stuff you got to do. If you ignore it, it becomes an urgent, critical, and your hair is on fire. So how much time did you spend in quadrant 2? And then what was this week for your work? What was your rate of perceived exertion? And then the third thing is, what was your rejuvenation? Sleep practice plus other things that you strategically did and scheduled. It sounds to me like what you were talking about is being intentional on your recovery. But the interesting thing is I use a Likert scale 1 to 5, but I get them to work the whole scale, where the goal is really 3. It's like 3 is just right, is Goldilocks, right? So, because some days you can spend too much time planning, some days you can have too much rejuvenation. And, it's like looking at those levers, you can actually see how they're related, right? It's like, I spent no time in Q2. Everything felt hard, and I didn't spend any time on regeneration. So it gets to a really interesting conversation, but, you're having that conversation once a week versus every day, and the trailing data that you have to kind of speak to the trends where you might, I'm assuming some of your metrics that you're talking about, you can probably start to predict them on, hey, on Tuesdays, you tend to, not sleep so well. Like, why? And so I'm interested to the extent that you can share them, these 1,500 users, what's some of the feedback that you're getting? And I know you gave us, an example there of, one client using it to optimize energy. But I'm interested in, maybe this is the question I was trying to get to, is like, how did you reduce all those injuries? Like if that was the first.
Florida State?
Well, at Florida State, and I suppose, how will you do that with the pickle ball community? Because it seems to me like that's the big motivator right now, is how do I not get injured? How do I stay fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think people make things way too complicated, and I'm really the person that should be blamed for this. And like, I look back and I'm like, golly, like I wish I would have just done so many things differently at the beginning. But for pickleball players, the first thing we're trying to get them to do is warm up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like seriously, just warm up. So we can't. This is a funny story, Jeremy, but everybody can relate to this. I'm in Katy, Texas, at a pickleball facility, showing some people the app, playing pickleball, and there's a guy named Julio. Julio's an engineer, and everybody's like, "Oh, Julio's the guy." Like everybody knows Julio, and he's drinking a beer, playing pickleball. I'm like, Julio, why won't you warm up? And he's like, because nobody else is doing it. Kind of pointing around the facility. I was like, so just be weird, warm up. And I was like, I got it. And so like we've turned that into a hashtag, t-shirts, and this guy started doing it, started feeling better, sends me a video of him warming up at the US Open for pickleball, and then he wins a medal. But like and then he starts posting on social media. So the whole point is like, can you get somebody to take one small confident step and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again, and do it again. And then you make them feel good, they earn trust, and like, well, what's the next small step that I can take, right? And it's warming up to start. That's the whole hook. Like everybody that's ever built a product knows that you need one hook. And then like once that hook's in, like we're giving them what they want so we can really give them what they need. And then it's like, okay, now let's introduce them to cool downs. And then now let's introduce them to resistance training. And then our model adapts the resistance training every day based off of their ability to adapt to stress. So volume, intensity, even some days we're like, hey, do something totally different. And then it's like, hey, like we're getting them good at that. Well, sleep is another lever you can pull. Let's start creating the conditions for restful and fulfilling sleep. Most people in the developed world, if you just get them to start doing those things, 80% of the problems go away. And then there's like, okay, I'm doing all this stuff right, but I'm still struggling with my blood sugar. I'm still struggling with energy. And then we start going, you need to start going deeper and deeper and deeper. But some people don't do anything for their mental fitness. They don't even know what that is. And they're just ruminating all day long, and they're just spinning themselves up. And so then once they can become aware of their thoughts and they can start taking control of their attention, all of a sudden, guess what? That stress lever starts getting turned down. Now they have more adaptive resources for other things. So I do see a future where we'll start being able to maybe come work with you, Jeremy, on the genetic side of things. But the biggest levers we're trying to pull is like get them to do the basics and then adjust those things daily based off of how they're adapting to stress. Like periodization, we all know is like it's good in theory. I just actually wrote I have a newsletter called Adaptation. And the newsletter I wrote for this week is when exercise hurts you. And I'm a exercise junkie. I love to exercise. Part of it's because the way it makes me feel. Part of it's that, fat Eric, that's always like a little bit afraid in the back of his head that overnight he's going to balloon, like that scar tissue.
Yeah.
And I've had to train myself that, like I'm today, the stress tank is overflowing. Probably not great to go put a bar on my back or something else. So I'm going to go walk with my wife. I'm going to, try to do things to like fill my cup.
Right.
And doing that is just going to, suck more adaptive reserves out. And so anyways, that's where my head's at.
When you think about, all the different populations that you could serve, what's one that you just really can't wait to bring AIM7 to?
Oh man, busy parents.
Ooh.
So right now with pickleball, it's a lot of 45 and up.
Yeah.
Which is great. It's a community game, which is super. I'm really excited. There's a premier research institute that we're working through with right now about a potential grant on some really cool studies because of the community aspect of this game. Which is fascinating to me, but like a lot of busy parents need this. Like they need to give themselves a break. Yeah. And they need to just know like what are the 1-2 high level actions I can take today to feel better. Right. And just compounding those things over time. Yeah. No offense to like no like no problem with Andrew Huberman or all that kind of stuff, but that's not equitable for the average person.
Yeah, I am.
The
Yeah.
average person in the Western world is inundated with so much junk. Like anything, their life is overly complicated, and what they really need to do is to simplify what's the best action I can take for me today to move the needle forward.
Mhm. Mhm. I love it. I definitely got to introduce you to Brandon Larson. I mentioned him to you.
Yeah.
He's the guy Red Bull the Rockets. He did a lot of human performance stuff at Red Bull. Now he's at NASA, but he built this really cool I guess playbook. And I got introduced to him through Taylor Johnson, who's a NFL / esport guy. And anyway, he introduced me to Brandon. And because I told Taylor that my wife and I were expecting. Our baby Brooke
Oh,
is now born.
congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, she's now seven months. And anyway, at the time, I told like Taylor, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like I'm a dad and still don't, by the way. But what he's like, well, you got to check out Brandon's thing. He's got this site. It's called Fantastic Dads, and it's basically like 52 science-backed, evidence-based tips to help you like become a dad. And it's very consumable, like bite-sized pieces where it's like 15 to 30-minute little show podcast, or you can read it. And we just made this like something that we've integrated into our family operating system, where we could go out on date night, family night, and listen to Fantastic Dads. And you learn about, here's what you can expect in the first year of childhood development, and here's what you can do to help facilitate. And by the way, like a big part of that is taking care of yourself, because you got to be a support to your partner. And it's just really, as you say, it's like it's simple, and it's something that I can integrate into a habit. And you can see the results right away in so far as like, well, like here's an example, like torticollis, and when and why this might manifest and what it might look like. And because of that journey, we brought Brooke into physio, and I'm happy to say she graduated from physio just last week. And
Wow.
yeah, so and then it's like, okay, here's where we're going to start speech training, and here's how you can mirroring, and here's the part of her vision that's actually developing. So build like a little mosaic wall to aid with. So it's all like really cool stuff. You spend like an hour a week on it, like 15 minutes a day, and all of a sudden you're becoming a fantastic dad. Anyway, one of the things that Brandon's got big vision for developing these playbooks, and I think certainly a part of it is the managing parents' health as part of it, because that's ultimately what's going to make healthier kids is parents who can care for them. And I think there is this bigger play on just Eric Melzone. He introduced us, right? I was just talking to him on Athletech today, and one of the things we were talking about is the inaccessibility of all this like crazy longevity hacks, let's say like the Huberman stuff, the Peter Attia book. It's like, yeah, cool, $70,000 a year, plus, I don't know, 20 hours a week. And like, and by the way, you've never done this before. So there's that whole skill of developing the habit. Basically, it's like, let's introduce a whole planet into the solar system and pretend that doesn't have an effect on the gravity, right? So what you were saying about parents, I mean, that's a really interesting way to really implement the increase in health span, which is in the next generation, right? Because we can do this incrementally, we can do this gradually. The kids see the habits that the parents are doing, and that's something that you can pass on in the generation. So really fascinating that you've identified busy parents as a target group, let's say. Okay, so you've got pickleball. We're talking about parents. What are you seeing? When you talked about like the models, talked about the N of one. What's the future trends with the, let's say we're tracking toward the singularity. AI is a big part of what's on everybody's mind right now, or at least they're talking about it. How is this hopeful future of individuals realizing their personal biology, like how are we getting closer to that? Is it the product? Is it the message? Is it the confluence of both? Ultimately, I think it's how are people healthier in the future is what it sounds like. And, going from sick care to healthcare. So do you see a future of wellness really taking off? And is AIM7 a part of that?
I do see a future of wellness taking off. I do see, I mean, what we're fighting against though is everything gets easier.
Mm,
Okay, like people get annoyed with having to track 10,000 steps a day.
mm,
Why do we even have to track 10,000 steps a day?
mhm.
Because we don't have to do anything besides sit there. Like we're knowledge workers now, right? Most of us were cranking away at our keyboards. We're not
Right,
outside
right,
working.
right,
So
right,
in
right.
some ways, everything's working against us to stay healthy. And so there's this tracking and measuring aspect to make sure that I'm doing the things that normally would kind of just happen, right? Like
Right.
I live even just like 60, 70 years ago, or in different parts of the country, you just
Hmm.
walk more.
Yeah.
You go outside to go to see your neighbor, and the neighbor's not 10 feet away. So I think that where things are going to go is more gentle recommendations based off of you and your lifestyle that are tailored to how you like to be communicated to and the
Mhm.
things that you like to do.
Yeah.
And the nudges and the directions going to be real personalized. We talk about AI agents. Google just released this whole suite of stuff, and I'm super excited to dig into what just happened. But AI agents are going to be things that are going to make our lives so much easier. They're going to be
Hmm.
trained on how we like to do business, how we like to respond to emails, and they're going to
Hmm.
curate things and do a lot of these jobs to be done, right? So that we
Hmm.
can work on
Hmm.
higher order things.
Right, right, right.
I think there's going to be agents that are going to be like coaches for us that are going to be tailored to how we like, again, how we like to be communicated with, our personal preferences. And we're going to be able to drill down demographically in all different ways. The generative AI to me is useless unless it's trained on the right data set. And
Hmm.
I think as we get more rich data, we can go from cohort recommendations that are real tightly bundled around you to
Hmm.
you.
Right.
And it's going to be highly contextualized. I just got on a plane. I flew to Chicago, which I'm doing tomorrow. Like all of a sudden, the coach knows all of this and
Right.
understands the impact on you. Hey, when you land, I know your calendar is XYZ. Here's a great time to sneak in this.
Hmm.
Oh, it's this
Hmm.
time of the week. Typically, by the end of the week, Erik's really tired. So, hey, Erik, maybe today you shouldn't be doing, the resistance training plan. Why don't you hop on the elliptical at XYZ place and go for this amount of time? And I've already teed up your journal. And by the way, I know you got to eat out. Here's a restaurant, and here are like the food groups. Like it's going to become that's the type of like system I see coming into play. And it's really probably not that far off with these really niche LLMs, which is, I think, where things are going to get really cool. That's part of what we're working towards here at AIM7.
Hmm.
You're going to be able to deliver content in a way that's tailored to you.
Hmm.
And with these wearables on your wrist that have all sorts of tracking information, maybe things we don't want to know are being tracked,
Hmm.
it's just going to be, it's going to feel native. I think that's where we're going. The CG, what was it? The Theranos idea of like one drop blood
Hmm.
test. Eventually we'll get there. And you'll maybe even have, there was a project I got we were working on a bid with the EU where like it was like a point of care project where you could literally like stick your finger into this tube and container in your house. It would measure all sorts of stuff. You take it out and then like it'd be like, here's your plan. Like that
Hmm.
type of stuff. I think
Hmm.
we're not that far off.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was talking with one of my entrepreneurs that I coach who works in the generative AI space in healthcare specifically, and so he's really close to this, and he's really cognizant of what he would call that singularity point of inflection where there's this exponential increase of effectiveness or technology development such that that curve goes from being exponential to this like straight line, and we've effectively, let's say, like, got everything that we could imagine in terms of the jobs to be done being provided to us. And then, of course, the threat of, artificial intelligence becoming self-aware and taking over into that Terminator type of apocalyptic view, which, I'm cautiously optimistic that that's not going to happen. But, what do I know? I'm not as close to this as I might like to be. But one of the things that we came back to was, this idea is like, there's going to be two kinds of people. There's going to be people who are used to being told what to do and their jobs are going to be threatened. And then there's people who they know what they want to do and they have purpose and they're going to leverage AI to build that hopeful future. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and where I think we all fall short, right? And we're all kind of on the spectrum, if you will, in terms of being proactive in terms of our daily lives. And I guess the question that I'm getting to is, do we risk becoming, what is too dependent, right? And how much of our wellness do we want to outsource? Because there's a lot of this that's like just purely mechanical, but there's a lot of it also that's emotional, spiritual, and there's an element of surprise that comes from placing yourself in nature, or placing yourself as part of some kind of fitness regime. So are we at a risk of becoming too prescriptive? Does that get boring? What are your thoughts there?
I think people have to be willing to be coached. That's the big question.
Mm-hmm.
And so the nut to be cracked there is like on the behavioral side.
Got it.
I think we can tell people what to do all day long. Like, I experienced this in sport. Hey, coach, so-and-so is going to blow up today.
Right.
And they would take that piece of paper and they would wipe their rear end with it. And then so-and-so would have a soft tissue injury. It's not always going to happen, but the risk was high, right? And then they just be like, whatever, screw it. This is what I'm doing. I've seen that play out so many times. And so the real nut to be cracked is the behavioral component. Can you design this in a way that actually gets somebody to take action for their own best self-interest? You can generate whatever you want to generate, but is it actually going to move you to take action?
Right. So that's my question: is what is that best self-interest? Is it the best self-interest? Because we know the social media algorithms can get us to buy things that aren't necessarily in our best interest, or to engage in clickbait.
Marketing.
So, yeah. How do we use that power for good? But so I think that's the bigger existential question that is coming is, well, know thyself. So you're like, oh, I want to run a marathon. It's like, do you? Why? Right. I want to bench 300 pounds. Do you really? Like, why? So I think there's going to be a lot of that. Like, why are you doing this thing? And I mean, I've personally come into this, I say crisis, not like it's my hair's on fire. What I mean is you've got to make a decision, like I'm not going to the Olympics. I've got a daughter to raise. I've got responsibilities as a father and husband. And so, how do I use fitness and, not injure myself? Because, if I got to go and get another bicep repair surgery, and I can't do the basic things around the house.
So I think you start with a good survey of what the person's intent is. What are they looking for? And then you have to understand what are the actions they like to take. And then you have to tailor recommendations based off of what they already like to do. It's like saying you need to eat healthy, but somebody really hates tilapia and you just keep telling them to eat tilapia. They're not going to eat tilapia and they're going to shut off whatever the recommendation engine is. However, if you say, hey, you need to get more protein, and here are like 50 different things you could eat, and like, oh, I like these 10. Great. Awesome. Now let's make a recommendation based off of what you like to do. Now, there is behavior modification that needs to take place. Well, what if you like to drink sodas? And we're like, you know what? You don't need to keep drinking all your calories. Well, that's where like, is this aligned with the outcome that you want? And, there's got to be some behavior change involved in there. I think that some of these drugs like Ozempic are making it easier, where people just don't eat. I don't think that's a great solution either. But if it saves your life, if somebody's morbidly obese and they take this drug and it saves their life, that's awesome. But like, somebody that needs to lose 20 pounds or 15 pounds and they get on this and they just waste away. I don't know. There's going to be a pharmacological component to this. I don't think I'm smart enough to know the final outcome. I do think though that it's going to be a combination of understanding what you're looking for, connecting the actions to things that you like to do, and then connecting it also to maybe like your core values, things that you really care about. And it's all going to be
There you
about
go.
behavior
Yeah.
modification.
Well, right. Just as I'm hearing you describe this, I'm like, I think there's going to be incredible value just on completing the intake form and what you might learn about yourself in that process.
Yes.
And one of the things I often struggle with is, there's this, well, think about the dichotomy of operating systems that we have. So there's, Apple and there's Android, for sake of a better comparison. So let's say Windows and there's Apple. How you behave on those operating systems, at least how I do, is very different. Or like in my preferences, and if I was to pick up a Windows machine right now, first of all, I wouldn't even know what to do. Or even if I jump on somebody else's machine, it's like, do I even know how to use this? And I guess what I'm driving at is, I think a lot of us are using default operating systems that weren't necessarily designed with our, as you say, our goals and our core values, et cetera. So that to me sounds like a massive opportunity on, updating the paradigm around, how you pursue health, wellness, longevity, fitness as a whole. So incredible work that you're doing, Erik. Yeah. Blown away in terms of what this is doing for, well, the pickleball community. But, now that I understand the background of how you got there, I'm really interested in the future that you're building in terms of learning more about you. So, our audience is as I mentioned to you, a range of folks in health tech, fitness, human performance. These are, different, heads of strategy of companies. You've got some consumers who are going to be interested in connecting with you. How can our listeners learn more about you and get involved with the narrative, the story that you're writing?
Hey, Jeremy, it kept cutting out. What was the last question?
Yeah. So the last question was, how can our listeners learn more about
Oh,
you, your work, and connect with you on a deeper strategic level?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I'm happy to just give you my email. You can do Erik at erikkorem.com. You can also check out Adaptation, my newsletter. That kind of bundles in my podcast as well. And then I'm on Instagram at Erik Korem on all the platforms. But if you just want to get directly a hold of me, you can go there. I put out a lot of good stuff on that newsletter. That's kind of where I bundle the content that's coming out of my head, and we send out a weekly newsletter on that. But I really appreciate you having me on. This is some of the guests that you've had on here, or that you're telling me that have come on, are like world class, and so I feel very humbled to have been on the show. Have a lot of respect for what you're doing, and I'm excited to listen to the show myself and to hear some of these wonderful conversations.
Awesome. Yeah, Erik. Hey, listen, it was such an incredible pleasure having you on the show. Definitely want to circle back with you and find out what's going on in chapter 2 of AIM7. I know you have a lot of really exciting things on the horizon, so we're definitely going to circle back and share the updates with our listeners as you evolve. So Erik, thank you so much for your time. What you're doing is incredibly innovative, and I'm just so grateful that I get to share this with our community. So thank you for joining.
Thank you, Jeremy.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the DNA of Things. Today we journeyed with Dr. Erik Korem through his transformative life experiences and groundbreaking work at AIM7. Dr. Korem's story of resilience and innovation not only inspired us, but it also provides a practical set of insights into optimizing human performance. We explored how his pioneering methods in sports science have transcended into AIM7's mission to democratize wellness, from reducing injuries in elite sports to offering personalized health recommendations for everyday fitness enthusiasts. Dr. Korem's work is truly revolutionizing how we approach health and human performance. Now, today, if you listened, you were able to make it through the end, you probably gained valuable knowledge on the importance of adaptive capacity and the role of tailored wellness solutions in achieving your health goals. While the data is big, remember, it's all about taking small, confident steps towards better health and understanding your own unique needs and preferences. Now, as always, if you found this episode impactful, please share it with your friends and community. Let's spread the love and knowledge to help everyone lead healthier and more fulfilling lives. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the DNA of things.